This episode is brought to you by Super Ordinary, an audio drama about a young girl who discovers she has superpowers. There's only one problem. They're connected to her panic attacks. To listen to their show, visit their website at superordinarypod.com. Hey everyone, I'm Marissa Tandon, and I am so excited to welcome you to the very first episode of You Are What You Love. Recently, I have been working on a project called That Vampire Show, which centers on this idea of fandom and centers on a teenage character who is very much open with what she loves. And I realized that it's been a while since I've felt comfortable talking about the media that I loved and the media that shaped me in such a way without feeling embarrassed. And I have been trying to find a way to start having those conversations again. And I realized I could do that with this show. So each episode will have a new guest, and we are going to dive into one question. What is the piece of media that changed who you are as a person? And the guest that I have today is a really special one. She's a pal of mine. She is a writer, she's a voice actor, she's a producer, and she's also the voice of Kat Wright on That Vampire Show. So it felt really fitting to have her on for our first episode. So, Lauren, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you.
I'm so excited to be here.
Yay. It's nice to see you again. It's been a while.
Yes.
So what are we talking about today? What is the piece of media that changed who you are as a person?
We are talking about the CW show Supernatural.
Whew.
An all-time.
I feel like a breeze just went through the room.
You felt a shiver?
I felt something go up my spine.
You felt Don't Fear the Reaper start playing in the distance.
There's
Maybe a minor key version of Carry On My Wayward Son. A song that has thus been, changed for the Netflix version to another song.
Oh, has it really?
I rewatched it on Netflix, and some of the songs are different in Netflix because of rights. They had to renegotiate. Oh my god! So the end of the cliffhanger at the end of season 1, it's not Bad Moon Rising anymore.
You're kidding.
It's not. I don't know what song it is, I watched it and I vividly remember that. And they changed it on Netflix, and I was like, well, I have to go back to my DVDs.
See, what's crazy about that, not to already dive into a change, but the end of season 1, that cliffhanger being to Bad Moon Rising, then Teen Wolf had a remake of Bad Moon Rising during season 3B when Styles is walking through the hospital with the demon things. And I was always like, oh, well, why does this song click so hard? And I was like, oh, obviously because I've already got a core moment with with it.
Oh my god. I'll always remember where I was.
Yeah.
Forever. I was there. I was there when the Great War happened. I watched it live.
I was right in the moment. Okay, so
I was screaming in my living room.
That's a great question, though. So so you were into Supernatural as it was airing, season 1. How did you get into it? What was the first moment that you clicked in?
I can't be sure where I discovered it, but I'm pretty sure it was like a TV guide, or I was really into just all the shows that came out. I wanted to give one episode. Okay. I would read the descriptions when they were like, "What are the new shows of the year?" And so this show was on my radar. I want to say I looked it up. I looked up the episode descriptions for season 1 because I was like, I know I hopped on when a certain amount of back catalog was out, but it was still not at the halfway point.
Of
and I think
season 1?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that the first episode I watched live was season 1, episode 11. And it was it was an episode called Scarecrow. It was a classic Monster of the Week episode. And I think that, I don't know, I think maybe I was 13 years old when this was coming out. So also, it's not out of the realm of possibility that, one of my friends at school had watched it and recommended it to me. But I remember, I think usually CW back then, I can't remember if that was after it became CW or, when all of the changes were happening. But they would show, the last week's episode before.
Okay,
so I think I had maybe just turned it on in the middle of a rerun, the rerun one, and then it just went into the new episode. But a Monster of the Week episode was a really good jumping on point. Because I really liked episodic stuff. I didn't really want huge overarching plots. I was used to when my mom and I would watch stuff together, it was usually just crime shows, mystery shows, or all of those. I just wanted like long seasons where I could just hang out with characters. And so this was one of the first times that that a show bridged the gap of something that I loved between like a more just like, I'm gonna jump in and just watch like either a sitcom or a mystery. And those shows that would have like season-long plot lines that you followed all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the first ones that I remember that kind of blended the two that I started to love. But yeah, I remember the Scarecrow episode was the first time when I watched live, and then I went and like waited until on the TV Guide Network they would say that they were re-showing the old episodes, and I was just like hungry for watching it from
to
the
catch
beginning.
back up. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I'm sure they still exist in my parents' garage. I still have video like VCR tape after VCR tape that were just me recording Supernatural episodes so that I could rewatch them over and over again.
I love that.
I remember laying on the floor like pressing record and then like stopping the recording so that I wouldn't have to watch the commercials when I had to rewatch it. I was like trying to make it. I was like, I want a streamlined viewing experience.
So you were creating Netflix before Netflix existed.
Yeah, I was a real pioneer. Yeah.
So
you know what? I
really
will take that credit.
That.
Yes.
Yeah. You were like, I've got it. What we need is a completely streamable.
I really should have monetized that. Damn it! I was a genius. I knew what the people wanted before capitalism did.
So did you watch it with other people, or was this like a core? Like you were watching TV with your mom at that point? Was this the first show you watched by yourself?
At first, I think it was just me, and then I eventually ended up roping my parents into watching it week to week. Like, you know, on the couch, like, you know, making sure that they were there. And then I roped all of my friends into watching it.
Okay.
So we would have like day after at school debrief sessions about the night, like what happened the night before. We would theorize, all of that fun stuff. So it was the first one of the. There was a lot of other shows, and there have been a lot of shows since where other friends have pulled me into their hyper fixation.
Yeah.
This is the first time where I was the driving force of bringing other people into like being like the person going out and preaching the good word of Supernatural.
So you've ruined lives is what I'm hearing.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, no, I deeply regret my actions. And looking back and being, because back then I was also trying to get people to watch, because it's crazy to think of today when we know it is this 15-season juggernaut.
Right.
That, you know, was just going to run forever. But like, I remember every year it was on the bubble and there were campaigns to get it renewed.
Yeah, there was moments where you were like, it's going. Like, it's not gonna.
Yeah, I was like, there's no way we're getting more. Yeah. And so you had to be part of the campaign. It was like, all right, friends, watch the show so it doesn't get canceled. You know, like there was a time when like Supernatural had the like fan grassroots energy that like Our Flag Means Death has right now. Like it's kind of which is insane because it's just like
no, it's
one is
huge.
But like there's something really scary about being part of a fandom at that time. But like I also think there is something that brings you into a hyperfixation about the danger because it feels special and it feels ephemeral.
Yeah. I would agree with that, because I was confession, also watching Supernatural at the time, and I definitely, my experience with it was not at season 1. I think I started maybe when season 2 was almost done airing. And it was absolutely one of my best friends in high school that we just constantly watched the same shows together, and it was either me pulling her into something or her pulling me into something, and she was like, there's this show about two brothers that are hunting demons and saving lives. And I was like, well, that works for me. That sounds good. And I remember looking for the streams, first of all, because this was pre-Netflix, trying to find like a way to watch it, finally catching it and getting up to code, but then realizing like if other people don't watch it, it could be gone and we'll never know what happened.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like that exists in the same way anymore. Like Our Flag Means Death had it recently, and there was that big core like
grassroots
push of it, of like, we want it and we want it now. But even that, like, it has star power, it has a massive network behind it, like it's bingeable, it's on
and we're
streaming.
in a world of so much streaming and so many platforms that it's also like there's more of a feeling of like there's a chance it goes somewhere else. There's a chance
Yeah.
it lives on in a different form. There's so many other ways to get media these days. Back then it was like this network renews it or else it's done forever.
And the or else is so strong, I feel like, because it, like you were saying, you had to literally record it on a VHS tape if you missed it. So like you had to be home in time to watch it. And if you didn't, you had to wait a week until you were hopefully home early enough to watch the replay.
Yeah.
And then you had to worry about spoilers for a week. Like you couldn't talk to your friends for a week.
Yeah, for a week.
It was such a different world.
Or you had to like give someone I remember I like had to give someone a VCR tape of the episode one time because a friend like had a like a rehearsal or a band thing or something, and they were like, I have to wait, like, and I want to know what happened, and I like literally brought the VCR to school and was like, watch this tonight so we can talk,
we can discuss. Yeah, I wonder, or maybe how you feel about this, but whether or not fandom can build in the same way without that kind of feeling, because using Our Flag Means Death as an example again, like I've noticed these waves where you're on Tumblr and one day it's every post is this one show, and then it's only 8 episodes or 10 episodes maybe, but it's only it's a short season. Supernatural was back in the 22 episode world. There was just that, and there was a weekly hold for like half your year. You are every week watching Supernatural.
It's an event. It's interesting because I think I had it like there was a time in like middle school, high school where like I had a show on like every night of the week. There was a show that I watched that I had like to look forward to at the end of the day. There was an event for me to look forward to when I got through my day. And so much of like, you know, when you're in, you know, middle school, which I think is even shittier than high school, like you need those like events at the end of the day of like, I'm the most cringy version of myself, but I have something that I love that makes me feel like I'm being seen and it's like something's being made for me, and like it's a really cool feeling. And then just being able to go and like talk about it the next day. I don't like the like, I don't know, I just think of like we were just talking about Stranger Things before we started recording, and like all of those episodes dropping at once is like this great communal experience for a couple days, but we're all experiencing it asynchronously. Right. It's not like we're all sitting down and feeling the things in the moment, and like so when like a cliffhanger happens, you're getting a call from your friend the second it happens.
Yeah.
Like literally we would watch the episode on TV, live TV together, and then get on a phone call right when it was done and talk about it.
Yeah, I remember my dad watching me, because when I think, like, it's so crazy to think, oh, there's a generation after us now because we're old, but so that is experiencing. God, you
don't have to tell me.
I know. But there's like there's a generation now that's experiencing content in that way that you're talking about, where it's like Stranger Things is everything's out, and hopefully you watched it in a day, and then we can talk about it for a couple of days, and then we'll forget about it until they say it's coming back, and then that's kind of it. It's like that moment. But I remember my dad coming home and watching me watch TV, and it used to drive him crazy because I would be texting the entire episode. And he was like, how are you? You're not even watching it. I was like, obviously I'm watching it. I'm talking about every single shot that's happening right now. Someone else has to
via
know.
Text message.
Right. And it was such a, I don't feel like it's the same anymore. Like it was such a communal experience of like, I have to be home in time. I have to watch it. I have to talk about it while it's happening. Then I have to get on a phone call afterwards and talk about it more. And then I have to talk about it at school tomorrow. Like it was such a living, breathing moment.
And I do think we've gone out of our ways to, even in the like, the current release schedule and the media landscape, I do see ways that we are like still seeking out that same feeling with the current release schedule, because I feel like they're like, thinking about it, it's like a lot of the focus has instead of, you know, going to the like the immediate reaction, like we're experiencing it together in the moment as it's airing, and it has gone a lot more towards like the community lives in the post-release fan works. And those have really expanded out and become like kind of bigger than the thing itself. Yeah. Like if you go into these communities that are like have huge fandom presence, like to use kind of like use Our Flag Means Death, because it's just kind of this amazing cultural juggernaut on the internet right now. Huge movement right now. That like the show is obviously incredible, and like the days that it was releasing were incredible, and these like incredible reactions that were happening were amazing to be there for on the day.
Mm-hmm.
But also like that is living on, and like the fandom is very much alive because of fans are like painting Renaissance paintings and shit, and like
Stunning stuff,
and
yeah.
baking these beautiful themed things and creating merch and doing cosplays and like writing like not even just fanfic, but like writing stuff in spec script format
Mm-hmm.
in a like, and so it's like and interacting with the creators and really like critically engaging on like metatextual levels.
Yeah.
And a lot of the like the things that it's really kind of expanded out in an interesting way where we're still seeking that out, but just in a different way. And that's but I also think that's kind of beautiful too, that instead of just reacting in the moment, it's creating things that we can then perpetually keep reacting to. That there's the original text and then there's the post text that is the fan text that keeps that going. And so we're reacting to the original show, and then we're reacting to the fan works, and then we're reacting to creator interviews and creator engagement and fan activities and stuff.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting to see that tradition live on just in a kind of a different format, but it's still a feeling that we want. It's ultimately to connect with people.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting because it feels like for when something was airing the way Supernatural was back then, it was the moments while you were waiting for the next episode. So you really like dug in. And I think fan fiction at the time was so different because you could try to predict what happened before next week, and then next week came and your the fan fiction you're reading doesn't make sense anymore. It doesn't work, or you were wrong, or you were right, and that's crazy. And so
mine was not right.
And then
you write in between season fanfics, and then like, oh, okay, what do I do now?
But with something like the streaming world now, it really lives in between. Like, to use Our Flag Means Death again, it lives in that space of like, what if we don't get anything else? What if this is the only thing that
what if this is what carries on that legacy? And like, we have to, it's also like a lot of people were very bitter about like, why is it taking so long for it to get renewed? Like, why, what if it's going to happen? And there's a lot of bitterness about that. So I think a lot of the fan works, especially the fan fiction, had a kind of like really interesting punk rock, like fuck you edge. Of like, if you're not, because it ended on such a huge cliffhanger, it's like, if you're not going to give us that closure and like preemptively saying like, fuck you, you won't.
Yeah.
I'm going to give that to myself. And because I'm not going to be dependent on you for that closure.
Which I think is really cool in a way, but also really speaks to like how much things have changed, because it was only a couple months. I mean, like it obviously was super successful and should have been renewed as instantly as possible and all that, but like it was like a couple months. I was like, they might be literally trying to figure out schedules and if it's possible, and it wasn't it, but it feels so because of that. Maybe it's that because of that drop where it's like, okay, well now I have every episode and everything is so fast now, like I demand it, whereas like,
well, and it felt like forever back then too, like
it wasn't like tomorrow, like
it always feels that way, like in a certain way. It's like, it's comforting because it's like, and that was kind of what made me like weirdly nostalgic in the wait for that renewal, to be honest, because I was like, oh, I haven't felt this way about like, oh god, I hope something gets renewed, like since early Supernatural days.
Wow.
Like it made me feel nostalgic for those days when I would just be like, oh my, like reading the like breakdowns of like what shows are like probably gonna get renewed, what shows are like definitely getting canceled, what shows are on the bubble, and seeing my favorite, and then being like, what are the like insider like magazines writing about its odds, like reading like fucking Golden Derby odds. It feels like it's like I'm like ah, god, what are our shots at getting it? And like, man, that was terrible in the moment, like my stomach was in knots, but like when that happened with this, I felt like a certain level of comfort of like, I'm pretty sure it's gonna get renewed, just when.
It's
but
just
like
when.
Being in that, there was a fun to it of just like, I missed those days when I was like, that engaged. And I feel like I've been kind of disengaged from fandom a lot because I think also like adulthood treats you to be ashamed of that level of enthusiasm.
Yeah.
Because I definitely was a kid that was very enthusiastic, and like people would kind of like half be like, you're a lot. And so I think my adulthood, I would try to train myself out of this, and I'm trying to go back and embrace those parts of myself more.
Yeah.
But it was really cool being able to like be a part of something that drew me in that way that I hadn't allowed myself to in a long time. Just because people were so infectious with their energy and their love. That reminded me of that time of being 13 and being like, are we going to get another one? This huge cliffhanger set to Bad Moon Rising or, whatever the other song on Netflix is now. Like, are we going to find out if they're okay,
Yeah. Yeah. And I totally agree. It just felt like it felt very nostalgic at the time.
Yeah.
And it's silly to say like, oh, I felt nostalgic for something that made me feel upset or like whatever. But I think it was kind of that community aspect that you're talking about, which is like everyone feels this way right now. And thousands of us are demanding, when is it coming back? Who's going to know what's happening? And like seeking out that feeling. I remember how wonderful that felt. And like now it was cool to have a moment where everyone was like, okay, but are we coming back? What are we doing? What's the moment?
It's just nice to be part of something to root for too.
Yeah.
I just think there's something interesting about that too, of just like having something to be like, to just be enthusiastic about.
Yeah.
And not feel like I feel like we're so much in a time of like, you have to have a take on something, or you have to have like, even on shows that you like, you have to be like, I just dissect the plot reasons for why I enjoy this thing because it has this statement about things, and it had this profound effect on like, made me realize things about. And it was just nice to have a show that's like, no, I like, obviously it does have all those things, but at the end of the day, I love it just because like, I just love it.
Yeah.
And I don't have to explain why. I just like, I love it and I want more of it.
Yeah.
Because it just makes me happy. Which is what like that initial hit was of Supernatural. We're like, this just makes me happy to be here. I love being in like a place where I'm viewing something that I have such an emotional stake in, because it's all like, that's what art's about. It's about catharsis.
Yeah.
It's fun to just like allow myself to have that catharsis.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious about like when you started watching Supernatural, you were 13, which is a rough time for everyone.
Oh, God, yeah.
But like, what did your life look like at the time? Were you playing sports? Were you doing theater? What were you doing at 13?
I was only child. I mean, not only child. I have two half brothers who were like 20 when I was born.
Okay.
So I was my mom's only child. So very much raised in an only child fashion. So like quite sheltered, quite shy and enthusiastic about things, and like had lovely parents who love my enthusiasm and very much fostered it. I was like a kid that was basically taken to every club and every hobby and like just try stuff, very enthusiastic about just like trying things. You can like try soccer. If you don't like it, you don't ever have to do it again, but like try it,
Yeah.
So fostering like curiosity about myself was a big thing. And my own interior life. I was going to a private magnet school.
Okay.
I was a like nerd, straight A's kid.
Cool.
Didn't know that I wanted to do theater yet. I think it's that point I was still not sure if I wanted to like just like be a writer. I wasn't sure. Like I wanted to, for a long time, I wanted to be like an editor at what is a book company? I don't know. A publishing company. Because I would we're about to get into it. My friends would write fan fiction.
Okay.
And I would edit it for them.
Oh, you were a beta reader.
Yeah, I was like but like they would give it to me on like notebook paper, and I would edit it, Like we had that, I don't know if your friends ever did this, where you would write back and forth notes in like a notebook.
Oh, okay.
And just like hand it off to each other, and like one person would have it for a class period and would like comment on what other people had written, and like sometimes you would make doodles and like other people would add to the doodles, and someone would write a story and then another person would comment on the story, and that just
that's
sort of
so cool. I did not do that, but I am jealous now.
Yeah, and that like spiraled outward, and like so people would just write stories and stuff like that, and then people would start bringing in like printed out versions of their fanfic, and we would just like write up like in like red marker, like just like write up on it, which is very fun. And like now we have the word for it, like beta reader, but like back then I did not know like anything. Like I had, at that point that was my first exposure to fan fiction, was just like my friends passing it off, and then like I think one of my friends was like told me about fanfiction.net, and that opened the world.
And this was with Supernatural, like hand in hand.
That was like with Supernatural. Because I was just like, because it was mainly just because like the weeks were just too fucking long apart. And I was just like, I want more content.
Yeah.
Like I was just like, I just wanted like, there was a Supernatural like website. It was like a fan site.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, and the first season was coming out where like they had different fan writers. And I remember they did in between seasons, every week they would put up a new, like in a script format, a like spec script season with like a different writer for every episode. Wow. And they did like an entire like 20 episode season that would just like release regularly. And I read those. And I remember, like, truly, like, my entire life revolved around this show for, like, a long time.
Yeah.
Like,
well,
in,
it's
like,
hard. It's hard not to. It was 15 years.
Well, and, like, the audition sides for minor characters would, like, leak on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And so people would, like, dissect that on the fan forums of like, okay, based on this side, what do we think is happening in this episode?
Wow.
And, like, what's the monster of the week that's coming up? Like, I was huge into spoilers. I didn't care.
So you wanted to know. You were like, let me know every single possible thing.
Yeah, I was like, happen. I want to know everything. Give me more content. Put it in my veins. Like,
yeah.
This was like right before I got into theater.
Okay.
Because like I incidentally ended up in theater because we had one of those schools that's like try an you had to like rotate through the electives and then pick one.
Yeah.
And that's how I ended up doing theater. But yeah, I was just like a middle schooler. I didn't have a ton going on in my life. I was not sporty at all. Like, tried it. I quit the soccer team that my dad was the coach of. Like, legit.
So you're like, nope, it's not working.
I was like, it's Florida.
Yeah.
It's fucking hot. I'm not doing it.
Okay. Yeah.
Always like the idea of sports, and then we get to like one match that's outside in the heat on a weekend, and I'd be like, I just want to be at home. Like, I don't want to do this.
Yeah, I was an indoor sports girl for that very reason.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, I want to read books. I read so many books.
Yeah.
And so like it really was just like it's really basic. It's just like I feel like I'm every stereotypical kid that ended up getting into this type of thing. You know, like I was just like loved My Chemical Romance. Like that was my other like number
big,
one.
this
was like around the Black Parade era. Like so it's
classic.
Just. Yeah. All tracks for me. Like, you know, I was the classic target for the, you know, to bring up a cursed word, super hulock. It was a cursed time and I was a cursed child, you know? So, yeah, that was what my life was like, you know?
For those of us who don't know, super hulock is referring to Supernatural, Doctor Who, and Sherlock on the BBC.
Yeah.
So if you mix all three together, you have what's called a path to death. I would say.
It's truly just like the most shameful part of my life. I don't think I ever like pridefully was like I'm a fan of that but I was a fan independently of all three and all of the shows that were then also fans, like people that were fans of those three were also fans of. I also jumped on BBC Merlin. I was there. Like I saw all the wars. I've been through pretty much all of the trenches that you possibly could be through. I was there.
You've left good men in the trenches and you've come out on the other side.
Yeah, I never got involved in the wars, but I was on Tumblr when they happened.
Oh, yes. Well, you know, the thing about super hulock, I think anybody who's heard that word and was online at the time, like, shivers when it comes out. So I'm sure anyone listening to this, that
if you know, you know.
You're just like, please. Yeah. But I thought it was looking back on it, it's such an interesting intersection of shows that don't necessarily have anything in common. Like Doctor Who and Supernatural, you can sort of get there. There's you know, a science fiction element. There's a monster of the week. There's an adventure to be had of some sort. There's sort of themes of family and those kinds of things. And then Sherlock getting kind of stuck in. One of the things that I started thinking about is like, it feels like, and kind of what you're describing too, it felt like three shows that gave you this idea that I'm the person who's ignored and something extraordinary could happen to me. Because I feel like that was what linked those three together. With Supernatural, it was like, you know, you come through Sam. I always want to call him Dean because he was Dean in Gilmore Girls, and I always thought that was so funny.
It's so confusing because I also watched all of Gilmore Girls, and it was confusing for me too. Yeah,
it was. I
was a Sam girl, for the record. I was wrong.
You were a Sam girl. Ooh,
I know.
End this interview.
No, I know. I was a Sam girl, and then when I went back and watched all the seasons, I can admit I was fully wrong.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
all about Dean. It is
all
fully about Dean.
I did a rewatch recently too, and rewatching it, I was like, how did anyone ever like Sam?
I agree. Like I rewatched like to completely sidetrack like what we were talking about during. I think I pretty much fell off the show for a decently long while.
Okay.
And then during the pandemic, I rediscovered it. I rewatched all of it, and then I watched all the way to the end.
Oh wow.
And I the whole thing, I was just like, I literally don't know how I ever thought that Sam was superior to Dean. I think it was because as a kid, I just was like, Sam is the prettier one and seems less like masculine, and so it was okay to have a crush on him.
Okay.
It was a lot more about like, I'm a 13-year-old girl, he's tall and has floppy hair. And then when I'm older, I appreciate storytelling and like good characters, and I was like, well, Dean's clearly more interesting.
I have actually found, talking to people about it, I'm an older sibling. Mm-hmm. And I've found that people who are either only children or younger siblings, the Dean thing takes longer to connect. Yeah. And I think I think it's just a direct like response to being like, oh yeah, I get that feeling. Yeah. But yeah, I think I have recently just been thinking about like, why did those three become this like amorphous blob? And I'm so curious about like, I mean, you were grounded in reality. I don't know that you were thinking someone's gonna come out of space with a big blue box, but
it's interesting. I mean, I think I'm thinking like right now, my first thought is just like, what connects them? Like, because I also think like the Sherlock Holmes Doctor Who of it all makes sense to me because there was just a trend of American kids really getting into British things.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I also think there is a like, this is different because it's British, you know? And they also, I think all three of them, the other thing that I think really draws them together is that they all felt like cult things to be into. They all felt like distinctly like uncool, like they were very cool things that in the moment felt like they were uncool things.
Very
that you could root for. Like Doctor Who has this kind of like classic nerdy like backstory. Like it has like such a lengthy history, but like it still felt like to like it, especially in America, felt like a very lame thing, and also felt like a thing that like other people didn't know about. Yeah. And Supernatural also was like constant in the bubble, like, and not a lot of people knew about it. It was really cool. Like merch was very much like you have to go on like not even Etsy because it didn't exist, like eBay, and people were making shit, you know? Yeah. Like, and then Sherlock, I remember I had the classic fan thing of like, I discovered this when it like the first season was airing on Masterpiece TV because like my mom loves PBS. Okay. And then I was like, I was cool because I got here first, you know? Yeah. Where like for me, that was so much of it, which was such a shitty thing too. Yeah. Me being like, I got there first, so I'm a good fan, and therefore I felt ownership over it. And I think that's a weird thing that I think a lot of people in specifically the Sherlock fandom have, where it's like there's a weird superiority because you like Sherlock. Like, I don't know. I think that all three of them, and I think that that's why it has such a bad internet reputation, like the triumvirate in a way, is because I think the like stereotypical view of people who liked all three were people that came in and were like, we're better than you. I feel like that's because we like these nerdy shows, we're the best.
Yeah. That's it, you know, but I think it was the thing that was weird about that to me though, because I totally agree, but the thing that was weird to me about that was that it almost felt like it came from like, this is the one thing I can be better than people at. Yeah. You know, like I was just like, I just remember when those shows were airing, like there was like that was when the clear social split of like girls who were going to parties and girls who were watching TV like nonstop and being weird about it. That's where that split started to come.
Well, that's before I found theater and found my community there. And I didn't feel like I was particularly exceptional in any way. Like just in my like middle school, you know, I wasn't involved in sports. Like I was unsuccessfully involved in sports. I was, you know, I was good in school, but not like the best. Yeah. I didn't have any like big clubs I was a part of. And like I was an only child. So I wanted something to be, at a certain point, you just want something to be your thing.
Yeah.
You know, you want something to have ownership over.
Yeah.
And to make you, like, memorable. Because I also think, like, in middle school and high school, it's, like, one of the leading feelings that you feel that just, like, torments you is feeling invisible.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that can feel like it's your fault for not being interesting enough. Rather than kind of, like, everyone going through their own thing, it can feel like the pressure's on you to make friends and to be visible and to be interesting and to have yourself figured out. And, like, now you see that manifesting in, like, kids having to have, like, a feeling like they have to have a fucking brand.
Yeah,
you know, like,
absolutely.
having to have, like, hashtags and TikToks, and you have to have a social media presence.
Right.
And, like, I think that just manifested in, like, once you found something that it's like, I love this, it's easy to make that your identity because it is something that you were innately searching for, is something to make your identity and to make yourself memorable to other people just so that they see you. And it's easy for that to go in too far in the opposite direction, to be like, I'm better than you because this is my identity, you know?
Yeah.
Because you're so
absolutely.
thirsty for recognition in any way.
Yeah. And it's so funny too, because it's like the people who you would be saying that to are like, okay, like.
Yeah, exactly. But you're, like, trying so hard. And I think what's also really interesting about those 3 shows, I think, there's a really interesting undercurrent of it. And I don't know, like, what it is, but it's also, like, there are shows with, in Supernatural's case, 2 men. And then the other show's, like, 1 man who is, like, a genius or is, like, exceptional in some way or, like, tortured in some way.
Yeah.
Or, and most importantly is emotionally cold and aloof, but with hidden depths.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there is a feeling that invites a feeling of ownership to fans, that it's like, I'm the one that understands this character.
Yeah.
That allows you to project yourself onto that character and be like, this badass character is actually, like, someone only I could understand.
I actually think that's really interesting, because I was talking about this with a friend recently about how all of the characters that I felt connected to growing up, like pre-college and even really through college as well, it's only recently that some of those characters have started to be women. Like, every character growing up, it was Tony Stark, it was Sherlock, it was the Doctor, it was Dean Winchester, who was the most emotionally constipated man available. But something that I thought was interesting when I was talking to her about it was that there is this, at least in earlier media too, there's just this understanding that women are going to be more emotionally intelligent in a conversation. Like, they are able to say, this is how I feel, and this is why I feel this way, and I want to express that. And I think that comes from societally, that it's more acceptable, obviously. But I don't feel like as a teenage girl you feel like you can express how you feel that way, that openly.
Yeah.
And so I always found myself being like, I just don't connect with this character. I don't connect with this woman who just can walk into a room and say, this is how I'm feeling and I'm upset. I do connect with this man who doesn't want to talk about it and would rather
so
shoot.
Interesting, because I think that's it.
Yeah.
And, like, it manifests in a different way for them. Like, it is a much more, like, toxically male way. But you're right. There is something in that of, like, I feel like I also have to hide my feelings under a bunch of stuff just to get through the day. Yeah. And even though that manifests in a completely different way, I sense instinctively and can feel a kinship to someone who's going through something similar. Because that's what I was always drawn to on the show.
That moment of, like, not being able to. Yeah.
Well, and the moments where, like, I mean, like, truly, like, I think that there was something really interesting that I've always tried to figure out, like, is it because, like, you know, as a girl, you're, like, intimidated by men? Is it because, like, this is a way of me watching, like, men processing their feelings and, like, dealing with toxic masculinity? But I think that you're right. I think it is more that it is, like, the more, like, not, like, the feminine side of it is what draws us to it. Yeah. Is that feeling of, like, I don't know, it is, like, an interesting universality that I feel like we only deal with in that type of media. Yeah. That I think is, like, feels like it is geared towards women, and not just in a, like, because it never was, like, even though I was, like, I have a crush on Sam Winchester, like, that was never why I stayed watching the show.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I was such a Dean girl, but it was never.
It was for them.
I do think back on it though, because those shows on paper should have had huge male fan bases. Like
Yeah.
two brothers traveling the country to fight demons, that's a show for guys, absolutely. But to me, it was like there were huge female audiences for that show, and it was a ton of women in like teenage girls and women in their 20s. And I think so much of it for me was just like I feel seen in some way, which sounds so crazy to be like, I would rather, shoot demons with a salt like shotgun, but then talk about my feelings. But like I would sometimes, like it's like, yeah, I would.
Yeah, I think I would. Like, there's a certain element of like, now with the benefit of hindsight, like I do feel seen by Dean Winchester.
Yeah.
Like which is crazy shit.
Yeah.
Like, but being like my 13-year-old self, like, and also because I think that's in the performance and you can feel it.
Yeah.
Of like, this is a character who is embarrassed to show vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like he hates the vulnerability. Like, it's not like, and maybe it is, but I don't know. Like, I never felt like it was coming from a true place of toxicity. It was coming from a place of like, I'm embarrassed or more like I can't let myself feel this way. Like, because I have to survive the day.
Yeah, it felt like there are bigger problems than how I feel. And so I have to keep moving. And that, to me, feels so human. Like, especially, I don't know about you, but I was a hyper-stressed teenager.
Oh, my God, yes.
I was like, at any moment, like, I have to go to class. You're in school all day, regardless of what level of classes you're taking. You're in school nonstop. You have some sort of probably extracurricular. Your parents are expecting things from you. Your friends are also, like, I think back on it now, but I'm like, 8 hours of being with the same people in a social circle 5 days a week, like that's exhausting.
Terrible.
And yeah, and there's just so much.
I remember I would get in the car at the end of the day, like my dad would pick me up from school, and I remember he would always like, and I know why he does that, because he was so curious about my day. He'd be like, how was your day? And he'd want to like go over like everything that happened in my day.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember completely shutting down and being like, I just had to be in school for 8 hours.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be there anymore. Like, I don't want to like talk about it. I don't want to talk about my feelings. I don't want to talk about like all the shitty things that I felt all day, and like the live wire I felt like I had to do, and the armor I felt like I had to put on to do it.
Yeah.
I just kind of want to like sit here in silence and listen to music.
Yeah.
And I think that like there's something about that like keeps
That's
coming up as a scene.
Right.
Of like, I don't want to talk about the shitty things that happened in my day. I just want to sit in the car with my dad and like listen to music, and like, and I guess I really never thought of it that way. That like, that's what the character feels. And so innately I was just like, I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. And I like this guy. And like to this day, I'm like, I like this guy. I like this. I like this character. I mean, he's like truly. There were some moments where I'm like, terrible shit.
Yeah.
But like, at the core, that's what I think the character is.
Yeah.
That's just like, I'm pushing through the day, and I guess one day I'll rest, but maybe not. Like, and I think that and that archetype of character just like keeps coming up in these fandoms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's so interesting too, because I've always been curious as to why that's such a distinctly, like, it's just given to male characters so specifically. And I don't know if
that's also the Doctor, and that's also Sherlock.
Yeah, well, you know what? We solved it. There's the link.
Like, that's it. Like,
it's, and the Doctor, I remember some of my favorite episodes of Doctor Who were the moments where you got a peek behind that. Like,
it's when the facade breaks.
Yeah, because it's Doctor Who is the opposite of like a kind of, grumpy male character. This is like,
it's the opposite end of the spectrum. It's like toxic positivity in a way.
Yeah, he's like, everything's great. Everything's so fun.
And I think that's why we responded to specifically David Tennant so well.
Yes.
Who was like, is my doctor,
Absolutely,
like,
same.
And it's like, because of those moments where he's like the nicest man on earth, and then he completely fucking cracks and you see what's underneath and you're like, oh my God.
Yeah.
That's what's going on. But you also like, it all tracks. It all makes sense that this is this person with this burden on them. Also, like, to take it out of the personal and just to take it onto like a macro like storytelling level, it's also just always satisfying to watch characters that have like internal contradictions to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Like I that really blew open a lot of doors for me. Like when I read about that, like kind of that like basic character rule of like characters should be like, it's this, but this. And those two things should be constantly in opposition to each other.
Yeah.
Where it's like, Dean Winchester is constantly like searching for rest and approval and love.
Yeah.
But will not let himself have it.
Yeah.
And will actively kill the parts of himself that reach out to another human being in any way.
Right.
That it's like, it is a constant back, and like at any given moment, and you can like keep this going for 15 seasons. He can go back and forth, and he can go this tug of war, and it only requires himself. You can have anything going on around him, and like it honestly doesn't matter, because everything that needs to happen with that conflict of that character happens entirely within himself.
It's just so it's really crazy to be able to look back on it at this point, like where we're,
Yeah.
you know, I don't even want to say fully formed, because are we? But
But
just
more
like
aware.
more aware, yeah, and to be able to say, okay, well, that's what it was. That's what made me feel like someone got me.
Yeah.
And then to take it like one step further, to then go on the internet and say other people feel seen by the same thing. I think is where that fandom element of it comes from. Like,
Yeah.
to be such a deep fan that you have to go and expand the story. You have to go write more. You have to go,
Yeah.
you know.
You have to go like theorize for months and months about like, I always love like reading meta from fans, specifically fans of shows that are between seasons, because like they don't turn into like full fanfics, but I love watching people like analyzing the like 6 seasons of a show that have come before, like evidence, and like looking at it and really tearing it, like not even tearing it apart, but like picking it apart at like the plot elements and trying to like reverse engineer the conversations that were had in a writer's room about like a multi-season arc, and trying to like reverse engineer detective figure out where we are in a larger arc, and therefore extrapolate outwards.
Yeah, like where we're going and what was before.
Where we're going.
Yeah.
Based on the clues of what's come before and our knowledge of story structure. And I always think that that's so fascinating, and those things have like actively made me understand tropes and structure more than like any book about story ever has.
You know, the thing I will say, when I ended up going to film school ultimately, when I took my first media crit class, one of the things that we had to do was my professor showed us the like title sequences, the opening credits for a couple of TV shows. And then he made us read papers, like real academic papers that had been published, about how each shot related to the themes of the show, what it told you, what it set you up to understand. And now, of course, like with Netflix, we have the skip intro button and everything like that, which totally, I am guilty of skipping, but there are so many little things, like Succession right now. If you watch the opening credits, every time it changes which kid is closer, and all these little story moments that are in that. But I remember sitting in class reading this paper and being like, I've read this before on Tumblr. It's what 13, 14, 15-year-olds are sitting there and explaining and breaking down incredible, genuine master's level understanding of film and of these different moments. And it's so interesting, because I think that when you read it on Tumblr and you say, like, I spent hours last night going through every frame of the Teen Wolf credits and explaining what it means and what it means to the character, that's the type of thing that people are like, oh, you're weird. But then if you're older and you say, I have a film degree, well, now it's legitimate. Now it's real. And it's just, there's so many of these little moments where it's like, you know, it's not legitimate because you love it so much. It's not real, but it is. It's literally.
Well, and especially when those people go on to create their own things, like we both have, like it's like, even if we're making things as we are that are kind of like not, they are and are not similar to those things that were formative to us, but like they still give you the tools to know what you like and don't like.
Yeah.
In terms of tropes and in terms of characters, and like, I don't know, there is story structure in my bones that I wouldn't have if I didn't watch these long running shows and knew like what worked on me and what didn't.
Right.
Tropes are tropes for a reason. Like, obviously any show that runs for 15 seasons is gonna fall like into a bunch of tropes, and a lot of them aren't gonna work. Like the latter seasons, like let's be clear. I do not stand by everything that Supernatural did. Like, I also feel like it's taken me a long time to get to that point, but like the Supernatural very much did many things wrong.
Yeah.
Like, let's get it. Also, you did really wrong by your female characters. I'm so sorry. But it also, like, it is important to see media do things wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And especially in the way that you interact with your fans, like, it is also quite interesting that of the, like, Super Hulak triumvirate, there are 2 of those 3 that ended in very unpopular ways.
Yeah. And one of them still has a chance to do so.
You still got a chance. But it was also just, like, we've gone down so many rabbit holes.
Yeah.
I just think it's really interesting to watch shows that start out leaning so much into what the fans want,
mm-hmm.
that then grow to be ashamed of that.
Mm.
And then turn into something else.
Mm-hmm.
And that, like, I'm kind of fascinated by where that happens.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like, I don't know, like, to talk about Sherlock really briefly, it's like, I've gone on so many rants about, like, the last couple seasons. Like, anyone who knows me is like, you bring up Sherlock, I'll rant for fucking 40 minutes about how much I hate that last season. But it's just like, it's because I'm kind of fascinated by how sometimes, like, creators who have so much meta written about a show,
mm-hmm.
and, like, fans who are so thoughtful and are, like, finding so many details about a story that they think that, like, has been written, and then watch a creator be like, well, we can't let them figure it out. We can't let them, like, it's like specifically, like, because people care so much.
Yeah.
And because they, like, quote unquote, like, figured out the ending. You're mad that they spoiled it because they understood that you were telling a good and well-told story, that therefore you have to go back and change it to something that, and I think this is something that's, like, in the larger cultural landscape that people are doing, where, like, surprise is valued more than finishing the arc of a good story.
Oh, absolutely. That shock, and I think that's such an interesting point about, like, where does the creator start to feel like I have to surprise people, because sometimes I think the best stories are the ones, like, the best written shows sometimes are the ones where you can guess the next line before they say it.
Exactly.
Because it means you understand what's happening.
Yeah.
And there's something, I think, I don't know if it only came from internet culture or if it came from if it's always been there, like, if there's always been a level of fandom influencing creator, but there is some sort of response where it is like, well, if they can figure it out, then that's wrong, that's bad. And it's always interesting to me because it's like,
or that's a bad thing on me, the creator. That means I'm doing a bad job.
Right. Yes. It's like,
what actually means you're doing a good job.
No, it means you're doing a great job. It means that's why it's like you're really tracking it. They always say, like, the best plot twist is one that you should have seen coming the whole time.
And I think the best finales are the ones that feel inevitable.
Yeah.
That are like, that are the ones that end and you go, oh, of course, it always should have ended this way.
Yeah.
That's how you make it satisfying. A satisfying ending isn't one that comes out of nowhere. Like, I think of Game of Thrones all the time. I think everyone thinks of Game of Thrones all the time.
Yeah.
But it's just like, I can't think of a single finale that was good because it surprised me.
No, yeah, I can't think of any that.
Good finales are all, like, I think of, like, I don't want to, like, spoilers. Like 6 Feet Under.
Mm.
But it's a story that is about a family that run a funeral home.
Mm-hmm.
And it is an entire show that is about their lives there and is about, like, relationships with death and our, like, day-to-day lives with death. Spoiler alert for a show that's been out for a long time. The last episode ends with a long sequence where you just see every single character that is of consequence on that show. You see how they die.
Mm.
And it's just a long montage where you just see their final, like, you've seen their lives for so many seasons, and at the end you see how they end their lives.
Yeah. Which,
for a show that is about death.
No, that's
and is about our relationship with death and treating it, maybe more casually and being more frank about it. It feels right that it ends with the frank depiction of that and not shying away from that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a surprise. Like, I think that, like, everyone who watched that show could have told you that's the end, but it's still one of the most moving finales I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Because it feels true to the thesis of the show.
Yeah.
And I'd always rather have a journey end reestablishing its thesis and being true to the story that it's telling than surprising me. And that is the sign of, because that's a sign of a good creator with a clear artistic vision.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so frustrating to see so many shows that are just like, Well, you figured it out, so I gotta change
I
it.
gotta switch. We gotta pivot. Something that this brings up that I would love to talk about is the idea of fix-it fic.
Yeah.
Which, if you are not familiar with that while you're listening to this show, fix-it fic is a genre of fan fiction where something happens on a show and a fan feels that that is devastatingly wrong and shouldn't have been where the story went, and they write a fix-it. They write a version, a Band-Aid of what it should have happened.
I feel like if you were in the Magicians fandom a few years ago, you probably read one because you probably needed it.
Yeah. I think every fandom we've mentioned today probably had a large chunk of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what is? Do you have any personal experience with fix-it fic? Is that your shtick?
That's not really what I wrote. Like, when I was writing it, I was writing basically between seasons of Supernatural. I was doing the thing we talked about earlier where, like, I don't know if we're going to get another season, so I'm going to come out and, like, write what I think the next season should be. Based on, like, extrapolating outwards from, like, what the themes were of this, I'm going to, like, write outward. And then once the new season came out, I just sort of kept writing. And so I was basically in, like, would probably be called, like a canon AU, where it's like same world but like
canon divergent almost.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. But I read a lot of Fix-It.
Yeah,
like that was I mean, I feel like that's like most people's, like, intro, if you don't almost write fic, then that's probably what sent you to fic.
Yeah. You're like,
unless you were like, I want to like read these characters fucking. Like,
those
are probably like
your
the two number ones.
You're either looking for sex or looking for a solution.
And like usually, like when people find out that I used to write fanfic, they're like, oh, like characters fucking, and I'm like, no, I was 14 and yet somehow not at all. I was really interested in making these men cry around each other.
Yeah,
I just really wanted them to talk about their feelings. But like, yeah, I think that it's. Yeah, no, like, Fix-It is so important because it's also like somebody's just fucking mad because people fucked it up. Like,
yeah,
even if I guarantee that every fucking person who consumes media has at the very least written one in their fucking head.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even if you're not putting it out on the internet, which again, many people like don't.
Yeah.
And also, like, many people write things and just never put them out there, which, like, I did for a long time. I just wouldn't post it.
Yeah.
I don't know. No media is going to satisfy you 100%.
Right. Yeah, and I think there's something really. I hate to overuse the word magical, but there's something really magical about feeling like I wish this would have ended this way, or how did you miss what you put out there? You put it on the page. God. How did you miss it?
Well, yeah, and like even if I don't write Fix-It fic, like the amount of times that me and my fiance Ian, we will go see movies that are incredibly frustrating and then come back and in the car and then in our home while we're making dinner, while we're like getting ready for bed, spend multiple hours just repitching the movie that we just watched or the TV show that we just watched.
Yeah.
Like, basically that's what we're doing, is that we're just like, we're incredibly frustrated with what we just watched. But also, like, I think that a lot of people are, and especially people who like create content, I'm interested in like taking things apart for parts and seeing like there's something in here that made me want it to work. It didn't work for me. What could it have done that would make me work, and can I learn something from that that like makes me a better creator going forward so that I can like make something more satisfying in the future.
Yeah,
you know. And there's something, and that's a form of Fix-It, like fic.
Oh, absolutely.
Just like, and I think we've all done that with our friends. Of just like, that was bullshit. That should have ended like that way. You know, like, you know, people watch Endgame and they're like, blank shouldn't have died. Like, I would have done it this way. This should have happened. You know.
No, and I think what's so interesting about that too is that oftentimes, because I do that all the time, nonstop.
It's so fun.
So fun.
So fun.
And one of the things I've always thought that is so interesting that I think maybe people who don't do this don't understand is that it's usually it's something that you did enjoy. Like, it's something that you liked enough that you're like, it's so upsetting that it didn't work out this way.
Oh, yeah, no, I wouldn't fucking scream about Sherlock as much as I did if I did not love that show.
Yeah, exactly. It's something about it was so right. It's just that I
Yeah.
love it so much that I want you to do it exactly the way I said.
Exactly.
And it feels like I'm right because you put it on the page and then on the screen. And now how did you not realize that I'm right? Because obviously if you would have called me, I could have helped you.
Well, it's also just sometimes it's like you had all the pieces set up.
Yeah.
Just fucking push the dominoes down and let it happen.
Right.
Just fucking finish it.
Right.
All you had to do, you were right there. Just push it across the line. It's just like, ah!
But, so something I think is interesting, actually, is like earlier you said you're trying to get back into letting yourself be a fan of things and be enthusiastic. And there is this point in time, I think, in all of our lives where like you start to feel the pressure of, I think you always feel the pressure of like being this enthusiastic is embarrassing, but you start to find yourself bending to that pressure to become quote unquote an adult. Do you have like a core moment where you remember that being the first time you started to think like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be talking about this like this?
Oh, man. That's hard because I really do think it was like a slow and steady thing. And because part of me also feels like I just traded one like quote unquote cringe thing for another quote unquote cringe thing when I got into musical theater. Because really it came to just like I got into musical theater and then like the fandom stuff sort of like died down a little bit, and then I was in musical theater and I was like, oh, I'm a huge fan of Glee. This is so much better, way less cringe. Oh my god. Then from musical theater just was like, cool, I'm gonna be a Shakespeare nerd now. And like I think it's like there was no point when I was like I have to hide all of myself, but I did like mutate it into what I thought were more acceptable ways and more acceptable pockets of people. Where I would just sort of like, okay, fandom isn't like sustainable. Like there's not as many people, because it was mainly like I went to high school and a lot of my friends from middle school went to other schools.
Okay.
I went to I went to an arts magnet school, and my other friends went to like a baccalaureate school basically.
Okay.
And so I wasn't around them as much, and so I didn't have that like community of people who were like that sounding board.
Yeah.
And I found theater, and like no one really, I couldn't really get those people into those things.
Interesting.
And so it became easier to, and I really like theater, and I liked musical theater. It became more interesting because I was in that crowd, and it became easier to fully invest myself in that instead.
Yeah. So nothing too sharp, but it's
and nothing like traumatic,
Yeah.
Just sort of like, the feeling that we all have where you go on a rant about something and you can see the other person's eyes glazing over.
Yeah.
Which isn't a bad thing and isn't traumatic, but it is just sort of like, oh God, I'm being exhausting.
Yeah.
Which I still like, with that Ian, my fiance, is really good about, is like always making me feel like even when I'm on a rant, like I'm listening to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm engaging with you because early on there were moments where he would be, doing something else and I'd be talking about this, and then I'd be like, oh shit, I'm being like super cringy and annoying. And he was like, no, I'm refocusing all my stuff on you. I don't want you to feel that way. And so now he like took that and is like actively fostering that in me and like encouraging that.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
Which has been really, really lovely and is one of the main reasons I love him. But that's, we've also just like grown into that together.
Yeah.
Where I'm also fostering that in him.
Yeah.
Because it's also just more interesting to be, as adults, to not hide that from each other, to like, our relationship is founded so much on those nerdy things, like quote unquote nerdy things.
Yeah.
And those like fandom things. And we have fandoms together now.
Yeah.
Which is really cool. And he's so supportive of like the, the hyperfixations I get into,
Did you guys
like our flag means death recently? Yeah.
Did you guys connect over fandom initially or a piece of something, or did you guys just meet?
Well, we're both like Shakespeare nerds, so we kind of initially like connected over that. But it's been really cool in quarantine. Some of our projects have been sharing those like shows with each other. He was really into like teen shows in that time. So he was obsessed with the OC when he was younger.
Oh, okay.
so he was like, took me through all of that. And then like when I was doing my Supernatural rewatch, he'd be like working from home in the other room and would come in like every third episode and like sit down and watch with me for a little bit. And I would just explain to him like, this is what's happening. And he'd be like, I have no idea what that is, but like, tell me about it.
Yeah.
Like, who's
So he's
Castiel? I don't know what's happening. But like, and then he would like, in a really lovely way, like create bits about it. And he'd remember these things. And like, we would talk about that, and we would like at a certain point like pitch fix-its together.
Yeah.
And like, and it was a really, really lovely thing that we got to do, and that I got to share with him, and that we got to share with each other.
Yeah.
And that made us, I think, understand each other so much more, because also like we create together, we write together.
Right.
And so it's also really interesting sometimes when you're writing with someone and you're seeing what they write, and then you get to go back and watch the things that inspired them, that were there when they were like hyperfixating when they were 13.
Yeah.
And seeing like, oh, you took that from that. And like, I see those foundational bones that grew within you to create the artistic self that you are.
Yeah.
And it's something that like he'll point out to me like, oh, you took that thing from that. And I hadn't even realized that, you know?
Oh, I
or
love
it's like,
that.
oh, you did that because you pitched that idea to me because you were angry that it didn't happen here. And I had never realized that, but it's like, oh, you're just fucking exercising. Like, we're all, as artists, just exercising demons of like lost opportunities from the media that we loved.
Yeah.
I think. To
I love
some
that.
degree. And that isn't something I think to be ashamed of. I think that's something that's really cool, because like no art is made in a vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're all like, so in some ways, like, I think we always like, we know that, and we always say that in like, no art's created in a vacuum. We're all inspired by the people who created art before us, and we're all building on we're standing on the bones of giants, we're really building on that. But sometimes you're creating art in spite.
Yeah.
You're creating art because you're like, I'm pissed off that this thing that I love did it wrong, and I want to give to people a story where that's done right.
I really think there's something strong about that, because there is this, sometimes I think through, and there's that sort of basic of like, oh, you wrote fan fiction and that's why you were connected to writing, and then you became blah, 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 blah. And people like to make it like an easy one-to-one. And I think it's not the case. I think there's like, there's such an interesting piece of what you just said, which is that it's creation born out of dissatisfaction. And wanting to give someone the feeling of completion that you didn't get, but then getting your own fandom and finding like, oh, I guess some people are also dissatisfied with the choices I'm making.
Yeah.
And it's like but there's something kind of nice about being like, well, maybe that dissatisfied child will grow into a
maybe
spiteful
they'll make
creator.
A thing,
Yeah.
But also like when you're but also like, ultimately, I do believe the mantra of like, create for yourself first.
Yeah.
Like, you have to be your target audience. You have to create something that you love. Because like, if you're trying to, because I think a lot of these shows too, like they go from making something very specific and very much the show that they want to make to like, that's why I think the shows are always better before they get super popular.
Yeah.
Not because like I liked it better when it wasn't popular, but because they could be for a niche audience.
Yes, absolutely.
They could be just for a few people, and those are the people who are most like you, the creator. Like, you're a small, scrappy thing, and you're basically just making something for yourself. And then, because you're making it for yourself, other people that are like you find that. And so you can kind of continue making it for them. But then, like, when you have to make it for more people, it feels like there's more people to please, and therefore you have to split yourself and make it less for you, and therefore less for those original people. And so it's really then the question of, like, who are you making the show for? But I also do think that the more general you make a show, you make it for nobody.
Yeah.
And that's why no one is satisfied by stuff like Game of Thrones, because they were trying to satisfy everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, I think when it's like, it's this idea of, and it's no one's fault. It's all a business. But once you start to have to worry about, are we going to get picked up? Are we commercial enough? You start having to make different choices, and it's hard. It's hard on both sides. But as a fan, you're like, I don't care. Like,
I don't fucking care.
Yeah, like, I just don't care that you had a hard time. Give me what I deserve.
And give my favorite character what he deserves.
Yeah, a warm fucking blanket and a
Dean
cup of
Winchester
tea.
deserves better. I said it.
Yeah, no, one of the things I will say about Dean Winchester, to bring it back to our boy, is that I always always loved his obsession with pie, and I never understood what it was, but I think it was that it was like what would satisfy him is so simple. Like if someone would just genuinely give him a night where he can have a slice of pie with his brother and not worry about anything, he would be happy.
Well, and you see him have those brief moments, and that's what I like. They give you enough of those tastes of seeing him happy that you want like a bigger fix of it.
Yeah.
I also think the genius of that character upon rewatch is the way that the show utilizes humor to keep you like locked into him. I also think like he's a more interesting character because I think Sam has to play the straight man so much.
Yeah.
Like Dean gets to do like the biggest dramatic shit.
Yeah.
And he's doing the stupidest like comedy stuff.
Yeah.
Like some of my favorite episodes of that show are just when like Jensen Ackles just fucking lets loose and does some big comedic performances.
Yeah.
Because I do think that there is, I'm a firm believer in like, I think they were talking about this, the directors of Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Okay.
We're talking about, which is like, if you've seen it, it's like there are some very broad, very silly humor moments in that movie.
Absolutely.
And in all of their films. But it is like humor is kind of used as a weapon for its audience in a way that it like laughter is a way of opening you up to being vulnerable so that then a punch can get in. And I think it's a really interesting way where it's like humor is a way of making an audience laugh and show their like their stomach so that you can go in for the punch, so that they're vulnerable and they're open and they're ready to receive an emotional truth.
You know, that's so interesting as well, because a lot of these characters that we've talked about in that same space of like why do we connect to these characters, they have that same thing. It is that kind of self-deprecating humor as armor, and these moments that make you connect to that. And I know for myself, like I was such a sarcastic little shit in high school and in middle school, and that grew into now I am a comedy writer and stand-up comedian, and there's so much of that. And we were working on season 2 of Sword and the Stoner, and I had turned scripts in to the actors and to Dylan, and Dylan in particular was like, we were, I won't spoil it because it's not even recorded yet, but there is an episode of season 2 that is a hard episode. It's there are moments that are funny, but it's not the funniest thing that we've ever done. And Dylan was like, yeah, you every time we get into this, like you just can't help yourself. Like you always, even when you set out to write a straight comedy, you can't help yourself. Something gets in there and gut punches. And I do think maybe that's where it comes from, of this moment of like, well, if I can make you laugh, then I can make you deal with this other thing too. Yeah.
I think laughter is a way in to people. Like it's something that Ian and I talk about on our show, where it's like season 1, we're all about like calling out tropes, subverting them as much as we can, and like really using that as a way of getting ideas across. But then at a certain point, I do think like you have to do the thing. Yeah. Like you can subvert the thing, but then you kind of just have to do the thing. And that's when like we were only going to do 1 season, and then, you know, it was going to end very, very like cynically in a way of like under like kind of just like judging the characters and coming in under a bunch of these tropes. But then it was like my sensibilities as a writer are much, I think, gentler than that. Like we're a satire or show. Yeah. And then in season 2, I'm just like, I just feel like my sensibilities are just like, but at a certain point, I just kind of want to do the tropes, and I just want to like give characters the chance to be happy and to grow and to like and also so many of these shows are about found family. Yeah. And just like, okay, but I also do believe like because of these shows and because of the media that I think a lot of us in our generation grew up on, and in this generation too, it's like, I do believe in the healing power of community and found family. Yeah. And like, you know, and people can be, and I think that I also think like there is something to having grown up loving characters that are not perfect. Like Dean Winchester is like a very problematic person in a lot of ways. And like I think a lot of, and like the Doctor is, and Sherlock definitely is. And like a bunch of these other characters are just like, these are terrible people on paper. Yeah. Like, really terrible. And it's crazy that I was able to follow them so far with really bad behavior. But I think that, like, it's really interesting, the messiness of these characters, and that we
Yeah.
are drawn to mess. And specifically that women are, because I think the characters, the female characters that we're given are so uncomplicated and so just, like, heroic and, like, strong and smart. And it's like, but I'm so drawn to characters that are just absolute messes.
Yeah.
And how do we play those same tropes, but with people who are like, quote unquote, problematic? I think, like, Dean Winchester's such an interesting character, and, like, it really was formative for my sensibilities of, like, I don't want a main character that's morally perfect. I want a main character that's a mess.
Yeah.
And, like, how does and I think there's something about, like, I love Ted Lasso. I love it so much. But I also think, like, and it is important to have aspirational characters that are like, that's what the world should be. And those people can bring people through the world and show people a better world. But I'm also super interested in characters where it's like this messy and broken and, like, really, like, not emotionally intelligent character. Like, if they can manage to do it, can manage to do the right thing and find connection and find hope.
Yeah.
Then we can too. Like, I'm much more interested in watching that character's, like, imperfect journey of becoming a better version of themselves.
Yeah.
And showing the path forward for us in that way.
Yeah.
Than I am in watching the perfect version of it. I'd rather watch someone struggle and fail a lot.
Yeah.
Because that feels more real to me.
Yeah, it feels, I think it's, for me, it's hard to watch shows where it's like, this guy means well, does well, and that's the truth. Like, it's like, okay, well, you know, I don't know that that people view themselves in a way where you can say, I am fundamentally and morally, epically good. There's something that just doesn't feel very human about that. There's something that feels, yes, aspirational. I would love to always be a good person and feel like I've never made a decision that hurt someone's feelings or that was the wrong choice. But it's not the case. And especially when I was 13, God, like, you know, like, it's just, there's something, and I think maybe there's something about looking at someone who should be strong, right? Like, who has these qualities that that you don't have at that point. And to be able to say, like you said, like, if that person's still having the same problems, like, I feel better about that. And I feel like watching them get their happy ending feels like I can have one too.
Which is why I think it can feel like such a betrayal when those characters don't get a happy ending.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like, I think there's you know, I think that's why it's like a lot of these ones that end on, like, really just, like, have you finished Supernatural? And the last time we talked, I didn't know if you'd finished it.
I hadn't, because I've gotten spoilers, and I was like, oh,
I think that's why certain parts of the Supernatural series finale, I think, felt like such a betrayal, and also the episodes leading up to it.
Yeah,
I'm just like, it feels like there's a central promise of, like, you know, like that, like, it's in the fucking song that's, like, the unofficial theme song. Like, there'll be peace. And it feels like there was a piece, but it felt like a cop-out, and it felt like not the way that anyone wanted, and not the way that the characters deserved, or, like, how the narrative felt like it was setting it up.
Yeah.
And it feels like that was across the board for, like, even, like, supporting characters. It was just like, this is, like, it's really interesting to watch a show be, like, have the energy, like, such an energy of, like, this is what the people want, and, like, being one of the people and being like, how did anyone think this is what we wanted? Like, literally, how did anyone in the room watch this and be like, that's what they wanted, you know?
Yeah. No, I think so. Sometimes I do think about that, though, and I wonder, like, with a legacy as big as Supernatural became, is there an ending that could have been satisfying to everyone? And I don't know, because
There's
I've never been in that
going to be an ending that
you know?
satisfies everyone. I think the most that you can, like, and I think that any ending that's trying to satisfy anyone is betraying itself.
Yeah.
So I think the only thing, like, that I, you know, at the end of the day, I think it all comes down to and I think that what's interesting about Supernatural is that it had so many showrunners, and each showrunner feels like they had a different thesis for what the show was about.
Yeah.
Which was interesting. And so it was just like, what thesis are we ending on? When really, I think that any good show, it's like, if you're doing a series finale, go back to the first episode.
Yeah.
So because you're never going to satisfy everyone who's, like, fans in season 15.
Right.
But I think for a series finale, I think you always have to go back to the very beginning. and go, where does this story start? And because I always think any ending has to be a mirror of the beginning, you know, as cheesy as it is, like, but also like, fuck, like the word cheesy, like, because like I watched, my fiance, I watched the show called Station 11 on HBO Max, which is fantastic, and I highly recommend it. Mm-hmm. There were moments that I got to in that last episode where both of us, like, on the page were like, oh, is this what's gonna happen? That's so cheesy. Yeah. But then it fucking executes it so well and so earnestly. Like, and all of the tropes. It's like, it's tropes beginning to end. Right. And it's everything that you knew is going to happen. Nothing is a surprise. Yeah. And yet I still, like, wept because it was just like, it was so true to what the characters' journeys were. Yeah. And I think that I, as a viewer, even had to be like, yeah, that's what it needed to be. Mm-hmm. And sometimes if you just execute like, at the end of the day, if you just execute it really fucking well, you can play the hits. Yeah. And that's okay.
I love, like, even in this conversation where the whole point is to say, like, I love this thing unconditionally and it's good for me and it makes me who I am, there's still this hesitation of, like, it's cheesy or it's lame or whatever. And it's so interesting because the truth is, like, you're right, fuck cheesy. Like, cheesy. And it made me think of the fact that, so my birthday's coming up and I was, you know, making plans for my birthday and texting people, and there's a Star Wars bar in LA, and so I was like, oh, like, we should try this out, whatever. And every text I sent, I said, you know, it could be really lame, but it could also be really fun. And one of my friends finally texted me back and was like, every single person you're texting loves Star Wars. Like, why are you justifying it? Like, we could go inside and there could be 3 lightsabers on the wall and everyone's going to have a really great time. But you just feel this constant, like, I hope no one thinks I'm lame. And I don't know where it comes from other than the fact that that's how people make you feel. Like, it's just, I love a happy ending. I love when things wrap up satisfyingly.
It's that thing where, like, no one wants to be, like, the first one to break that. I feel like once you create, like, that's the kind of the beautiful point of any friend group where, like, you know someone well enough that, like, they know you and they know you, like, that, like, I think you have to, like, no one wants to be the first one to show vulnerability. Yeah. In any situation. And there is a vulnerability in showing anything that you love. Yeah. Like, truly love. And all of these things, like, even if it's, like, it's fictional stuff, like, it is a love. And there is an innate vulnerability in any type of love. Yeah. And so it can feel sensitive because you want other people to love the thing that you love, because if they don't like it, anything you love is a part of you. And so it can feel like if they don't like it, or if they're indifferent to it, it can feel like it is an indifference towards you. You cannot separate yourself from the things that you love.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that.
And so no one wants to be the first one to show that. But I've been really, like, to talk a little bit about, like, my relationship with that is going into a more healing place. Like, I also am incredibly lucky to have a friend group where I became really good friends, kind of incidentally through theater, with someone who is really big in the Star Wars fan community. Like, is part of a Star Wars fandom. It's Utini. If anyone's interested, they're really, really cool. But he, you know, loved, like, one of the first things I ever learned about him was he loved Star Wars. And it's so much of who he is. It's so much of, like, this wonderful person that he is. And, like, and so it was really great in our friend group. He was always, like, really brave, and he was the first one that's like, I love this thing. I'm putting this thing that I love front and center about me. And I'm not going to be, like, you know, and you can take or you can leave that. But that's who I am. And, like, that was one of the things that I came to love about him first. And so in return, it felt natural to share those things that I love with him. Yeah. Because I just felt like he had offered something of himself, and therefore I could offer something in return. Yeah. And I think that is such a gift that he gave me in his friendship. And I will always, like, love him for that. Because, like, now, even though, like, I think he hasn't watched Our Flag Means Death, he's still, like, sending me memes and was still, like, texting me when it got renewed and was, like, celebrating with me. And the same way that I celebrate with him when Star Wars releases come out. And, like, I don't know, I just think that it's hard to break that ice and put yourself out there, but it's really cool as an adult friend group when you can find that and rediscover those childish, like, not child, like, not childish in a bad way, but good way.
Yeah.
Parts of yourself, because you have to love things to be a whole person.
I think that's maybe the perfect moment to end this on,
Yeah.
because I think that is so true. And I think, one of my favorite things about doing this show so far has been listening to how passionate people get when you say, like, I kind of, when we started it, I was like, are people going to want to do this? Like, are people going to want to talk about it? And I suppose not shockingly at all, when you tell someone, would you like to talk about the thing that matters most to you? Absolutely. And it lights up just everything. There's something about just giving someone space to talk about what they love, and how much you can learn about a person that way. Like, one of the first things we connected over was this, and that's why I wanted you to be on the show. Yeah. But there's something so, like you said, vulnerable and wonderful, if I can say that word. There's something so vulnerable and wonderful about being able to share what you love. And I think you're right. Like, sometimes the most interesting part of a person is what they love. And you can't be a whole person unless you love things. So I'm going to end with the question that I ask everyone, which is, if you had never watched Supernatural, if you'd never heard of it, never seen a thing, what would be different about you today?
Oh God, I had this question like told to me in prep, and I'm still like, and I thought about it so much of today. It was really a gateway into so much, and I'm sure there would have been another gateway in to all of this. Mm-hmm. But I'm glad it happened when it did. I'm glad that I got into it so early, and that like I found I wouldn't have some of the friends that I have, because I don't think I would have. I don't know. I it's so difficult. I think there are so many things about like plot, like so much, because there's 15 seasons, because there was so much content, and because I was with it so long, I don't think I would have had certain sensibilities of what I like in art and what I don't like in art. It created so much of the like, because there was so much content constantly at such a crucial moment. It really did help me. All of these shows that go on for so long, it's just throwing a bunch of stuff at the wall. And a lot of that stuff I maybe didn't like, but that also taught me so much. I think you learn just as much from what you don't like as what you do, because it teaches you what paths not to go down. And I think it helped me as a storyteller in that way. But also I created so many friends that it gave me the initiative and the drive to go out and share a thing that I love with other people, and to invite them into it, that I'm still doing today. I still do the same thing that I did back then, when I'm just like texting people like, have you watched this? Watch it and talk to me about it and text me about it. I still feel the same way like when I get texts from friends who are watching shows that I recommended to them, who are like live texting me it. And it's not the same because we're not watching it at the same time, but it still makes me feel connected. Like it's still so embedded into the way I talk to my friends. It's still the way that I keep up with my relationships is, live text me this show I recommended to you and I'll do the same. I have entire friends where that's like the foundation of our friend group. And I started doing that at this time, and I created those skills and that way of talking here. And it's one of my favorite things in the world, and it brings me so much joy.
I love that.
Well, and I love you, Dean Winchester. You're also really
I love
hot.
you, Dean Winchester.
Also,
what a beautiful man.
You're a real hottie. Like, you're a real one.
Oh,
I didn't say that enough, but also they were really hot, and that was formative to me.
There's that too, also, yeah. Well, thank you so much, Lauren, for joining me.
Thank you. I'm so excited to have done this.
Yeah, I had a great time. So until next Wednesday, this has been You Are What You Love. I hope you had a good time. We'll be back every Wednesday with new guests and new topics to talk about. But in between, you can find me on Twitter at Marissa Kumari, where you can also find my newsletter that ties into this show. You can also find all of that information at our website, tandonproductions.com, and just click on our show art on the homepage. I'll see you next Wednesday, and until then, remember, in the wise words of Lauren herself, you have to love things to be a whole person. This episode was brought to you by His Royal Fake Highness. To listen to their show, visit tandonproductions.com or search His Royal Fake Highness in your favorite podcast app. And now, please enjoy a sneak peek of their show.
Is everything okay?
Yeah, everything's totally okay. That's why I'm calling you in the middle of the night.
What's wrong? Is it Dad? Did you
If you just let me finish... No, of course I haven't impregnated someone.
Sally,
Who would I be
Susie,
impregnating? Her name was Jennifer.
You're
not
really
even
such
close
a
because you don't
bland
listen,
name.
which is what I need you to do.
I listen. What are you
Ophelia!
trying to imply?
I'm trying to tell you the king is dead.
What?
There's like approximately 1 million cameras out front.
Look, we slipped the bouncer a hundo to keep him at bay, but I don't know how long that's gonna last.
Shit! I told you to answer your phone.
It was on silent.
You're a fucking crown prince, first in line for the throne. You don't think you should be reachable?
You don't think that your tone of voice is incredibly shrill?
Hey, you guys maybe want to take your little lover spat somewhere it won't end up on CNN first thing tomorrow?
Please tell me he didn't bring me back to capitalize on the royal family's mourning period.
Dad didn't bring you back to capitalize on the royal family's mourning period?
Like you mean it?
That would require me to believe it, dear sister.
There is, of course, the matter of succession.
I'll have someone let the school know I won't be back for the fall term.
Well, that's certainly your prerogative, nephew. But the issue isn't a matter of location.
Issue? The king is dead. Long live his frightfully handsome son.
Yes, his unwed son.
What does that have to do with anything?
Nephew, if you had read any of our governing laws, you'd know that succession only passes.
What?
Married heirs.
Excuse me?
The heir to the throne. You must be married at the time of succession. Until such a time, the throne passes to the next qualified heir.
Which would be...
Well, me, as it stands.
What are you doing?
We should tell them.
Tell them what?
I know it wasn't really the timeline we planned, but it seems relevant to let you all know now, though the circumstances are unfortunate.
Oh, what
Hamlet and I are engaged.
You're
what?
Wait, what? Right. Yeah. Me and Ho are engaged. To be married.
Yup, engaged.
Every single episode of His Royal Fake Highness will be available to binge on Leap Day, February 29, 2020. Until then, join us on social media at officialhrfh and at our website, tandonproductions.com.